I would like to dedicate this story to my closest friends, the people who I love to play video games with. The characters in the story are all loosely based on them, and I look forward to many years of memories to come. Additionally, the story goes out to my family, who always knew I enjoyed writing and supported my authoring efforts. I love you all to the moon and back, and thank you for your continued support. I would also like to thank the developers at Battlestate Games for their unending love for the game they have created that allowed for many good times between my friends and I. Disclaimer: this is a work of non-commercial fan fiction inspired by the video game Escape from Tarkov, which is the sole property of Battlestate Games. I claim no ownership of the original setting, factions, or characters created by Battlestate Games. All real-world brands, companies, weapons, and products referenced in this story are the property of their respective owners and are used in a fictional context for the sake of realism. No infringement or association is intended. All original characters and events in this story are works of fiction. Some characters are loosely inspired by real individuals with their consent. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, beyond that is purely coincidental. This work is not intended to express or imply any political statement or commentary regarding Russia, the United States, NATO, or any other nation, government, or organization mentioned within. Note to the reader: given the geopolitical climate surrounding the Russian Federation, I find it necessary to insert this section into my story before we delve into it. In absolutely no way do I support Russia's actions in Ukraine, and in absolutely no way whatsoever do I align with the Russian Federation. I do not support Russia's past actions in the country of Georgia, the annexation of Crimea, or any negative military or diplomatic actions taken by Russia in other nations. I'm a proud American, and I'm currently serving the United States in the Navy. That being said, the story is also not meant to be taken literally. Anything I have written in this work, whether it be praising or denouncing Russia, the Kremlin, the USA, NATO, Western nations, or any other nations, factions, organizations, or governments, is not meant to be taken literally, and I cannot stress this enough. Escape from Tarkov is a game I have enjoyed playing long before the war in Ukraine, and the story has been through many drafts in the years leading up to the war. It is purely coincidental that the war occurs during the writing and release of the story. Please understand that the main characters are operators of Bear, the Russian PMC faction in the game, and they are all fictional characters who are proud of their homeland and proud to be Russian in the same way that you may be proud to be from your own country. Anything I write about any real nation, government, organization, or faction in this story is based on the beliefs and opinions of these characters, who again are works of fiction. This non-commercial fan fiction is my own twist on Battlestate Games' Escape from Tarkov and Russia 2028 projects. I am allegiant to the United States of America. My whole life growing up, I have wanted to serve this great country. I've always been a patriot, and have always firmly believed that the United States is the greatest nation on the planet. Thank you for taking the time to hear me out on this, as I feel this is very important given what my job is and what the story is about. Now, please enjoy. Dmitri clutched his AK-74M so tightly his knuckles throbbed. The Caucasus wind bit through his gloves, sharp and bitter as iron. Around him, war thundered, not the clean noise of training exercises, but the deafening chaos of men dying. His superiors called it liberation, but all Dmitri saw were burned-out cars, hollow windows, and ghosts. He pressed himself against the tracks of his unit's last surviving BMP-2. The metal was freezing against his back, his breath fogging over the armor. A moment ago, Grozny's streets had been silent, the kind of silence that felt watched. Then, the city came alive. RPGs screamed from the windows of towering apartment buildings. His unit's lone T-72 erupted in a burst of fire as its turret ripped free, vaulting skyward before crashing down in a shower of sparks and screams. The blast's thunder rolled through Dimitri's chest. He flinched as shrapnel clattered off the BMP-2's armor. He couldn't help but picture the men inside the tank, alive one second, nothing but ash the next. Men lay scattered on the snowy ground, motionless, rifles half buried beneath them. Some men returned fire, while others yelled out orders and gave frantic hand signals. Others lay on the cold ground screaming in pain. The constant metallic clatter of shell casings, the groan of wounded men. The endless volleys of AK and PKM fire from both sides. Dimitri struggled to control his breathing, and his heart raced. The unmistakable roar of a Dishcam machine gun let loose a volley of hellfire, with 12.7mm bullets meant to bring down helicopters. Its voice was monstrous and reverberated in violent waves through Dimitri's bones. Tracers ripped the air like angry threads. Each burst from the Dishcam punched the air like thunder. The large projectiles slammed so hard, the concrete spat chunks from its facades. The Dishcam roared again, a sound like tearing metal. Someone screamed. Then silence, shattered by the BMP-2's autocannon returning fire. The shockwaves of the machine's cannon shook Dimitri's core. Dimitri clenched his teeth. For a beat, he wanted nothing to do with this place or the war that brought him here. In training, they taught him that NATO was the threat. Not Chechens. Not civilians. Yet here he was, an invader in someone else's city. He quelled the thoughts of his political outlook as he remembered the importance of focusing on the situation. He looked to his right. His commander shouted into a radio, requesting a Hind gunship for fire support. Support which was most likely to be denied, as the Russians' goal was to not level the entire city. Someone grabbed Dimitri by the shoulders, and he looked up to see his sergeant. "Private, get up and shoot! Move your ass!" he yelled. Being a volunteer rather than a conscript, Dimitri was spared of any physical abuse, but not beratings. He, like the conscripts, would get plenty of those. But overall, the senior officers and NCOs within his unit treated him with a higher respect than the others. Dimitri nodded in response, and after a sergeant went back to focusing on the fight, Dimitri looked down at his rifle. He pulled the bolt back slightly to ensure a round was loaded. 5.45 by 39mm 7/6 standard issue. He checked the fire selector, ensuring it was in the semi-automatic position. He turned around to face the BMP-2 at a low crouch. Dimitri edged his shoulder over the BMP-2's hull to get a look at the apartment building. The neon lines of tracers continued to zip down from the building to the street. With each angry tracer was the promise of another man torn open. He followed the lines of tracers up with his eyes to the 7th floor. There, massive muzzle flashes erupted where the monstrous Dishcam was firing. Dimitri forced himself to calm his breathing and counted in beats of 2 as he'd been taught. In 2, out 2. He brought his rifle to his shoulder and put his irons over the window. The firefight blurred into background noise. His world narrowed to the rifle's iron sights. One trembling window 7 floors up. Through the muzzle flash, a shape flickered. Small, too small. Dimitri blinked. A memory surfaced, uninvited. The sound of a child's laughter as he rode his bike past a local park back home. The sound cut through the chaos like glass through silk. He broke his composure for a moment and looked down to the ground, blinking the sound of childish whimsy from his mind. He focused his eyes back on the front sight post of his rifle, with his jaw clenched and the muscles of his throat tight with anxiety and fear. The stiff stock dug into his shoulder. He forced his jaw to unclench, centered the front sight, and squeezed. One shot, then another. Quick, disciplined, until the firing stuttered and fell away. The tracers veered off in an upwards arc, away from the men on the street. Silence filled the air where the repetitious thunder of the machine gun had been. A metallic taste floated through Dimitri's dry mouth, and his hands began to tremble slightly. His heart slammed against his ribcage like a jackhammer. His breath was heavy. Despite the fact that there was no longer enemy fire raining around him, He stood stiff and frozen, with his rifle held and aimed at the now still machine gun. His stomach turned to stone. The figure in the window slumped forward, limp, too small to be a man. After a moment, the muscles in his throat relaxed, and his heart rate began to slow. He lowered his rifle slowly, switching the safety selector back to the safe position. Fierce and selfish relief that boiled like hot blood surfaced behind his ribs. Relief that he no longer faced the machine gun, and that no more of his unit would be subject to the bullets that ripped limbs from the bodies of dozens of his fellow men. He could still hear the sounds of the dying city, distant gunfire and artillery, but for a breath, he had given his unit a chance. He took his hand from the pistol grip of the rifle and slid it into one of the pouches on his combat vest. His gloved hands felt the familiar, cold, blackened steel handle of his karambit, what had been a gift from his father's time in the military. Something Dmitri carried with him everywhere, a lucky charm, perhaps. Chechen rebels funneled out of the entrance of the apartment with hands above their heads. The soldiers escorted the now prisoners to the rear of the formation, where they were lined up on the opposite side of the road and put on their knees, facing away from the Russians. Slowly, Dmitri stepped away from the BMP-2 and let out a long breath that flowed in a thin vapor into the frostbitten air. The fear and anxiety were fleeting rapidly. He peered up at the overcast sky to see the first specks of pure white snowflakes of the day begin to drift down. He turned and regrouped with the rest of his unit at the rear. Field medics conducted triage on the wounded. Those with any doubt were carried into a marked truck to be taken back to the forward operating base. The others were quickly patched up and told to regroup. Dmitri watched the medics work, their movements all mechanical. His ears still rang. Every sound seemed far away. Squad leaders conducted roll calls. Other soldiers calmed themselves by sipping water from their canteens and slowly pacing around. No one spoke of the dead. "Sir," one of the sergeants had reported to the officer in charge, "should we restrain the rebels and take them back to base with us? Command wants no prisoners. We don't have transport or manpower. Execute them." A cold and bitter feeling resonated in Dmitri's chest. Surely that was not in keeping with the laws of war. But who was he to question? His hands tightened around his rifle. He began to turn away from the line of rebels, feeling a wave of nausea in his stomach, as he could not bear to witness the execution of these men, who'd surrendered themselves, likely in the hopes that the Russian military would keep them alive and treat them humanely, and moreover, potentially release them once the conflict was over. But before he could get away, the same officer approached him. "Private Grigorovich," the officer commanded. Dmitri quickly stiffened to the position of attention, his rifle slung at his side. "Sir!" "There's something I need of you," the officer said. "You want the Spetsnaz, don't you, Private? Well then show me loyalty." Dmitri's heart stopped for a moment. His face was drained of color and warmth. He could not gather words to reply to the officer. The words of protest clawed at his brain. The fear and anxiety Dmitri had just escaped flooded back into his veins. He'd read plenty of books and seen plenty of films. Dmitri figured he already knew where the officer was going with this. The officer placed a hand on Dmitri's shoulder and ushered him to the line of kneeling prisoners, each shaking in fear, their hands raised above their heads. The officer stopped him behind a middle-aged looking man who trembled visibly. He pressed something cold into Dmitri's chest. He looked down. The grip of a Makarov pistol. Cold metal. Heavy. Final. "Kill this traitor," he said quietly. Dmitri looked up at the officer. He raised an eyebrow and tilted his head towards the pistol in a gesture for Dmitri to take it. Dmitri's hand trembled. Cold and scared, Dmitri still could not formulate words of protest. He wanted the Spetsnaz with everything in him. He had aspired all his young life so far to join their ranks and to be known as one of the world's most elite and professional warriors. To follow in his father's stead. To this point, he hadn't let anything stop him, though now he was not so sure this is what his father would have wanted. And there will be no punishment. This is in accordance with the orders from command. Carry it out, the officer stated. Dmitri grasped the pistol's slippery grip. It smelled faintly of gun oil, and its metal shined like a well-cleaned and hardly used tool, free of nicks, burrs, and rust. The officer smiled at Dmitri and nodded reassuringly as he released the gun. Dmitri's hand trembled. His breath fogged the air around him. The men knelt before him. He put the barrel of the small sidearm to the back of the rebel's head. The man's trembling grew more visceral, and he began to cry. Not like a soldier, but like a father. "Please, sir, please spare me," the man begged. Dmitri stood still for a moment with the barrel pressed against the man's skull. The man sobbed. Snow drifted between them. Dmitri's finger trembled lightly on the trigger. "I have a family. Please, they need me. They cannot fend on their own." Doubt began to shroud Dmitri's mind. He did not believe he could do this. He told himself it was duty, that these men were monsters, that the uniform made it right. But the words in his head rang hollow. Dmitri let out a shaky exhale and whispered a plea for the Lord's forgiveness. A gust of wind picked up, and from the corner of his eye, Dmitri saw something in the man's hand flicker. Dmitri squeezed his eyes shut as he began a panicked breathing. He pulled. A single shot cracked the air. Dmitri slowly opened his eyes. The man lay face down in dirty snow, the white already smeared red. Clutched in his hand was the photograph of a baby smiling, the same age as Dmitri's own daughter. Somewhere under the hammer of his pulse, a child's laugh echoed once more, faint beneath the sound of his own heartbeat. Then only silence and falling snow.